event organized by Center for Public Policy Research, which is an independent public policy think tank based out in Kochi, the Indian state of Kerala. Our engagement in public policy that began in 2004 has initiated open dialogue, policy changes, and institutional transformation in the areas of international relations and security, livelihood, education, urban reform, health, governance, and law. To know more about what we do, please do visit our website, www.cppr.in, and our social media accounts. I am Anu Maria Francis, Research Associate at CPPR, your host for the discussion. So before we begin with our discussion, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all the participants who have logged in today from across the world. We look forward to engaging with you to enrich today's discussions. To put in your questions to the speaker, you can add them in the chat box. You can also watch the live streaming of the webinar on our YouTube channel. You can also follow the event on Twitter. Keep track on our live tweets on the hashtag CPPR webinar. So now I would like to introduce our panelists for the day. We have with us Dr. Charan Singh. He is a non-executive chairman of Punjab and Sindh Bank and chief executive of the Foundation for Economic Growth and Welfare, EGROW. He was full-time visiting faculty and former RBI Chair Professor from 2012 to 2016 at the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, where he taught comparative monetary policy and policy issues in the Indian economy. Earlier, he was a senior economist at the Independent Evaluation Office of the IMF from August 2009 to November 2012, and he was also the research director at the RBI in the period of 1997 to 2009. We welcome you, sir, to the discussion. Now, I would like to welcome our chairman, Dr. D Dhanuraj. He is a founder chairman of the Center for Public Policy Research and the director of Civitas Consultancy Private Limited, both based in Kochi. He is also the president of Association of Public Policy Education in India. Dr. Dhanuraj is also a well-known analyst with news and media organizations on topics like union budget, urban issues, political economy, general elections, state elections for more than a decade now. He has appeared on CNBC TV 18, Manorama News TV, Media One, India Vision, Asianet News, and has written for The Hindu, Times of India, Life Mint, Money Control, and many more other papers. I'm sure that, welcome you, sir. I'm sure that we'll have an engaging discussion ahead. So to set the context of discussion, budget to 2023 is the last full year budget for the current government ahead of the 2024 Lok Sabha General Assembly elections. The economic survey gave us a very brighter picture of the Indian economy, recovering from a pandemic-induced contraction, Russia-Ukraine conflict, and inflation. Indian economy is staging a broad-based recovery across sectors, positioning to ascend to a pre-pandemic growth path in the financial year 2023. IMF also has retained India's 2023 growth forecast at 6.8%, terming country as a bright spot and a major engine of growth amid an expected fall in the global growth, which is projected as 2.9% in 2023. There is a steady fall in WPI inflation rates from 8.67% in October 2022 to 4.95% in December 2022. The CP inflation rates is also on a steady decline where it is 5.88% in December 2022. So even when the survey claims, the economic survey claims that the retail inflation is back within the RBI's target range in November 2022, we are yet to reach the inflation targets of RBI. But again, the finance minister in the budget stuck to the fiscal deficit roadmap in the budget with a target of 5.9% in financial year 24 and adhered to the target for the current year as well. So Dr. Charan Singh, being an expert in economic policy, with the growing global recessionary fears and inflationary pressures, is India is in a good macroeconomic position to propel a sustained growth in the coming years. What do you think about this, sir?
Absolutely. Very good introduction and laying the context. I must say that the budget has been prepared in a very difficult time, both domestic as well as global, and then also at a time when we are entering the election phase. So as you said, there's the last full year budget. And then the next year budget is, of course, going to be interim. And then after the election results, it's going to be again an 8-month or a 7-month budget. So it's a very crucial time. The global situation is grim, as you have already mentioned. The interest rates are rising significantly, sharply in the advanced countries. And the fear of global recession is setting in. Unemployment is bound to increase. The slowdown in America, Euro, and England is almost imminent. That means the export markets for us are going to be also very shaky or shallow. In these circumstances, a budget has been made. Domestically, again, challenges are there. We know that the export markets are going to face this problem. On the inflation front, we may not be touching that same high inflation which the Western world is touching. 5 years, 5 times higher than their 30-year average, which is mind-boggling. On an average, in America, inflation is around 2% if you take a 30-year average. It's touching 10% now. So the aggressiveness in the interest rate adjustment is obviously understood. There's going to be a sacrifice ratio and slowdown in growth in those countries. With that, our exports are going to get impacted and our industry is going to get impacted. And within the country, we are still recovering from pandemic. Manrega expenditure, which is a significant reduction, shows that people have gone back to the cities. And people in the cities, if you look at urban unemployment, not the best one can dream of. Tax collections normally have never been very high. They range in the range of 17 to 18% of GDP, vis-a-vis the rest of the world, where tax to GDP ratios are generally in the range of 30 to 40%, in some cases above 40%. In these circumstances, you want to continue to sustain growth. Because through the pandemic, your policies were good and you emerged as the fastest growing economy in the world. And obviously, you want that to be sustained now. So in these circumstances, the budget has been made and the budget has, I think, done a remarkable job. They could have easily taken the excuse and said, we are going to expand fiscal deficit. In contrast, they've scaled down the fiscal deficit from 6.4 to 5.9%. That means the fiscal consolidation path that they had started 2 years ago, and they want to bring it around 4% by 25-26, continues unabated. So that is providing continuity to the budget. Nobody can imagine that in a grim situation, instead of increasing expenditure on Manrega, on food subsidy or fertilizer, or social sector health and education, the government is thinking of a futuristic approach and expanding the expenditure on capital account. And if you look at the capital account, where much of the expenditure is increasing, is on railways, and then 50 airports and those sort of centers, and then 100 transport hubs. So they're trying to build infrastructure, lots of expenditure on roads, on rolling stock. Please remember the Vande Mataram train coaches are made in India. So they're spending on infrastructure. They're spending on things that can be produced within the country. They're spending on road infrastructure, railways, airways, and also waterways, employment generating, with multiplier effect on employment and growth. So that means it's an intergenerational multi-year project which will show results. So that is why I say that in these circumstances, it is providing continuity from the past and it is very futuristic in nature, while the principles of fiscal prudence have been retained. Last thing that I want to say in my opening remarks is, if you look at the correction of the gross fiscal deficit, the major correction is in the revenue deficit. where it gets corrected from 4.1% to 2.9%. So that is why I say the quality of adjustment is extremely good and positive. And that, I think, shows the hallmark of the political regime with which and the resolve to take the country forward and not succumb to excuses and fiscal profligacy is something which we need to appreciate. Thank you.
Thank you for that initial remark, sir. So just as a follow-up question, so do you really think that the capex allocation, like they have increased it to 3.3% of the GDP, so will it ramp up the virtuous cycle of investment and job creation? Will it help to crowd in private investments?
Very good question. Very good question. Absolutely. My own feeling is that if you look at where the rupee is coming and where the rupee is going, the rupee is being spent 20% on interest payments. That means your borrowings are very high. And if you look at the borrowing part, about 34% of the total is coming from borrowings. So that means when borrowings are so high, obviously it'll get reflected in interest payments, and that's exactly what is happening. So if the investment now on capital expenditure is in areas where lots of crowding in happens and the private sector also participates, then what is going to happen? You will find buoyancy in tax collection because the economy is doing better. And that's exactly what I see. In this budget, they have formulated their data, their targets, their estimates at 10.5%, which I think is conservative. Because if the country has the potential to grow around, and in the economic survey we read it, that around 6.8%, but we can touch 7. And if corrections are done and reforms are undertaken, we can even grow at 8%. Suppose we are growing at 7% and inflation is around 5%, we should be averaging 12% nominal growth. Even if we say we are 7 and inflation is around 4, we are still around 11. But 10.5 is a very conservative estimate. In any case, they've done it at 10.5, and even at 10.5, tax collection is buoyant, and that is why the revenue deficit to GDP ratio is taking the major correction there. That is mainly happening because, according to me, the private sector crowding in is going to take place. So where is going to take place? So if they are going for roads, obviously private sector will play a role in it. If they are going for rolling stock, if they are going for widening the broad gauge, they are trying to modernize the railways in case the bullet train has to run, the roadways, railways, waterways, airways. If airports have to be made, the private airlines are operating, all that makes profit to the private sector. If 50 heliports are being conceived and 100 transport projects are being thought, obviously it's going to help again the private sector. The emphasis on developing the tourist spots is again going to help the whole ecosystem in the region. So to my mind, the budget is aiming at those projects where the private sector also becomes a part of the game and then benefits from it. So even in the housing sector, I must mention that Prime Minister's Awas Yojana, the housing sector engages nearly 275 industries. And once the housing sector is booming or doing well, these 275 industries which enter into a house, they're all doing well. And most of it is in the private sector. So to my mind, the budget does have the crowding in implications, and that is what is reflected in tax buoyancy and tax collection in the budget.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for that great analysis. So moving on to Dhanush, sir. So the finance minister gave a budget based on 7 priorities, what she called Saptrishi. So to be very specific, she focuses on inclusive development, reaching the last mile, infrastructure and investment, unleashing the potential, green growth, youth power, and financial sector. So how do you see these priorities set by the government for the year? Are they, is it a growth-oriented budget? What are your general comments on this?
The 7 items or the 7 pillars or the finance minister's Saptarishi ideas, I think these are the buzzwords in the global economy these days, whether it is a matter with youth empowerment or with the green growth. I think these are the issues that global economies or the geopolitics or the domestic constituencies are discussing for a long time. And if you look at what this government has been doing for the last many years, they are at the very forefront of decarbonization globally and also at the domestic, in the domestic market as well. And they are also into, you remember the slogan Beti Bachao Andolan slogan that I remember, Prime Minister Modi remarked about it in the previously the last BJP executive meeting. He exhorted all the party workers go to the village and discuss it. So women empowerment is one of the key themes of the government. Green is a key theme of the government. Infrastructure, this is one of the, I would say, the government's main focus in the last many years. Especially, I believe in the last 5 years, government has spent a lot of money in the infrastructure development. And this has something to do with the, the anticipation and aspirations of the middle class of this country. I don't think any government in previous decades heavily invested in infrastructure, even though there is an allegation that this infrastructure development is only for the rich and upper middle class. But my theory here is, I think probably the government is trying to induce middle class in the country, instead of a gradual natural growth of middle class in the country. I think by invoking these provisions and also investing in infrastructure, heavily built infrastructure like flyovers, metro systems. You remember the many various projects announced by this government in the previous years. Gati Shakti. Then we have the 1 trillion $1 trillion investment in the infrastructure development for the last 10 years. In fact, it also shows that government is so confident about retaining. There will be. I'm sure the government is very hopeful or wishful or confident, I would say, about the re-election of this government, 2024. That's what I think. Almost everything they're discussing is next 10 years with a 10 years timeline. So that kind of confidence is very interesting, because that confidence will be resonated in every action that they do. They have a long innings. They are not playing 2020 match. They are playing a test match now. Right? Next 10 years we are here and we are going to build this country. We are going to rebuild this nation. And I think the budget tried to touch upon almost every aspect. I was also looking at MSME sectors. They are trying to give some 2 lakh crore credit for the MSME sector. They were also looking at let's say, for example, look at the provisions given for artificial intelligence, 5G labs. This will probably excite a lot of youngsters and startups in this country. Then they were also looking at the tribals. They discussed. Finance Minister mentioned about the Eklavya schools and appointment of some 38,000 teachers. Then, of course, we discussed the women empowerment part. They touched upon few items there also. So altogether, I think from a political economy point of view, not from a economist point of view, from a political economy point of view, I think they try to please every sections of the society, and including the middle class with the tax exemptions that they declared. So by and large, I resonate or agree with Professor Charan Singh's views on it's a very carefully crafted budget. especially in the global context in which there is a forecast that there is going to be a global recession. And in India also, we are seeing this inflationary pressure on the economy. I believe the revenue receipt and the revenue expenditure side, that was more interesting to me also, as what Dr. Charan Singh mentioned earlier. They try to manage it in a very good way so that we can expect 10.4% nominal GDP growth, and that probably will propel this country forward. But I think the trend was there. I think most of the announcements are not surprising to me, given the the previous records of this finance minister and the government. There's a way Nirmala Sitharaman presents the budget, and most of the announcements were on the expected lines. The only surprise to me, at least, I was not expecting a slab change in the tax. So they really tried to hit that middle class part and please them. And but I think in the revenue calculations, even though they are forgiving the taxes, but my general understanding is that government is not going to lose money. So that is also a carefully crafted revenue expenditure, revenue receipt, and revenue deficit calculation. That I think we should congratulate them for doing that. Now we have 9 elections this year, and general elections next year. Some of these aspects, in fact, if you look at it, it also goes very well with the electoral politics. We have 3 general elections, Rajasthan, 3 major state elections, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Chhattisgarh, where the tribals are going to play a major role. My understanding is that around 110 constituencies in Chhattisgarh, Rajasthan, and Jharkhand area that this government is actually targeting on. So many of these announcements, in fact, going to help them. And there's an announcement in about Karnataka's river rejuvenation and dam building, and that I hope will help them. So I don't want to look at this budget from a very political, through a political lens. But what I am trying to say is that it shows the confidence of the government. They were not trying to so populist in this, in her presentation. They were not trying to please, stretching the basket, but they did it very well, managing whatever resources they have and try to strengthen the physical health of the government. So that is something that was expected, and that is what Finance Minister did yesterday.
Thank you for the comment, sir. Even I think, the budget in some way is helping the middle class with the tax exemption, the new tax slabs. I think even the consumption will go up with more disposable income in the hands of the middle class. So, being an urban expert for quite some years, like you have been practicing in the urban sector for the past 18 years. So I just want to know your view about the budget focus on urban infrastructure. And also there were some announcements with respect to municipal bonds and incentivizing the urban reforms for the urban local government. So I just want to know your take on this.
See, the urban infrastructure rejuvenation started in 2004 with Jawaharlal Nehru National Urban Renewal Mission. This government, when they came into power, they introduced a smart city project that is coming to an end. Officially, the closure date is June 2023. That is after 2 months from now. So a lot of money has been transferred or invested or channeled to various urban infrastructure projects, as well as for the rejuvenation of cities in the country. We have more than 100 cities, smart cities. Earlier we had 65 JNNERM cities. And the focus has been either on transport, improving the urban mobility, urban infrastructure, or improving, let's say, some of the basic social infrastructures related to the city framework. So this yesterday's budget announced 10,000 crores for tier 2, tier 3 cities. That is what they want to constitute as urban infrastructure development fund. For me, as a person who works in urban sector, exciting, but also, with a tale of caution, I want to discuss this. We have seen this transfer of money in the last many years. We worked in many cities in India. So many cities, including the city, now we are coming from Kochi, has got an unclaimed money of around 600 to 700 crores. Remember, the project is coming to close in 2 months. So we don't know how to claim that money. So basically, the issue in the city infrastructure is, you don't have the power, you don't have the expertise, you don't have the capacity. So money is not a big challenge today. In terms of urban growth or urban infrastructure development, the country is concerned. I think money is not a concern. The government of India is pumping money, international agencies are pumping money, and now we have got another fund. They said that it will be like a rural development fund. The counterpart to rural development would be the urban development fund. Great. So I think there should be various policy initiatives to strengthen our urban local bodies. Money alone, that is a learning in the last 10, 15 years since we started this urban rejuvenation projects. And money alone is not going to help you. Let's say, for example, we have 39 metro projects in the country. 39 cities in the country have got metro systems. But look at expansions and also the break evens. And I'm not, asking for profit making in the urban transport structure. But most of the metros don't have the expected ridership, or they're bleeding. And many of these metro systems are finding it difficult to repay the loans that they have taken. So building infrastructure, whether it is a metro system or a flyover, or let's say bringing new roads, widening the highways, I'm always amused. Adding to the capex questions that you referred to Dr. Charan Singh, I wonder all the time why we don't announce money for buying public transport, right? You have got around 10.5 lakh crore or 13 lakh crore, including the state allocation for the capex, and out of that, around I think 30 to 35% will go to the infrastructure project that will mostly focus on roads. In railways, thankfully, we are talking about rolling stock and related infrastructure development. But in the highway development, I don't see any mention. This is not the case of yesterday's budget alone. It's the case for many years now. We are so happy to announce all this highway development, and that's, for me, is a hardware. But where is the software? You have to have buses, right? You have to have. You should think about public transport. Otherwise, who is going to utilize it? So, in that context, I think budget alone will not help you. Reviving or rejuvenating the urban infrastructures. I think we need a debate and we need policies to help to augment the expertise and institutionalization processes within the urban local bodies, and of course the transfer of power to the local bodies.
Thank you, sir. So I'm just curious to know Dr. Charan Singh's comments on this, like regarding the urban infrastructure and the viewpoint of Dhanuraj. Yes.
I'm totally in agreement with what he's saying. And also, my own thought is on the urban metro. Again, I agree with you, and I think much more needs to be done. And I also believe that, and this is one thought, Dhanuraj, you may like to correct me. When we all claim that the oil prices are going through the sky, in Western world, people would generally shift into sharing a cab or sharing cars. And in India, that never happened. Means people still take pride in traveling alone in the car. Means that thought never occurs to them that we could share a car or carpooling can be done. On the other hand, in Western world, public transport plays a very big role, and in metros, the urban infrastructure plays a very important role. But in India, again, I didn't see that. So many times I feel, and I therefore totally agree with you when you spoke about the urban infrastructure, so much more needs to be done, and the quality of ridership has to change. That's not happening. In contrast, I have another viewpoint. See, I also look at the rural model. And I think the rural model somehow uh, has not taken off. So the smart city concept also, yes, just imagine 4 or 5 years back, that was the hot talk, and everybody was speaking about smart cities, and then 100 smart cities were chosen, and another round of smart cities were chosen. But I'm not sure whether they've really become smart. Because what do you do in a country where people don't want to become smart? Even under Swachh Bharat, you see massive allocation has been done in this budget also. But if you go to the countryside and see what is happening, you still find littering taking place all across the place. So, in people do not want or are not interested or not convinced, what can the government do? Therefore, this logic of strengthening the local bodies, that's where the expenditure efficiency is at the maximum. Strengthening the local bodies, assigning them the task, and saying this is what we are expecting from you, I think is a great idea. And that needs to be done. But looking at the rural model, to my mind, in case we're able to strengthen the rural areas and provide them the bandwidth, large bandwidth, say 5G, and therefore now after COVID, when it so happens that we have learned the art of working from home, and the employer also accepts that people can work from home and rather deliver more efficiently, while the commuting time for the employee is saved, for the employer, the cost of rent and food and air conditioning and housing and hosting the individual is over. It's a win-win situation for both. So I think the rural model needs to be experimented once again. In the rural model, just imagine if we have, and I proposed this long time ago, while I was still at IIM Bangalore, and I was suggesting in case we can have an internet provided to the whole village, why should people not work from home or in the park nearby? Why should people need an office space to go and work? So therefore, I think the rural model has not been fully experimented or not been popularized, but I think there is potential there in addition to what, of course, and everything that Professor Dhanuraj said, I totally agree with him. I think in addition to that, the rural model needs to be considered, as well as strengthening and empowering the local bodies are concerned. And once that happens, I think that will be a big thing. I would also like to mention that as far as urbanization is concerned, it's a trend and nobody can reverse it actually. It's bound to happen in days to come. We can stall it, or we can make the rural areas far more interesting, that people, the exodus from the rural to urban is not that rapid. That can be done. But I also have a feeling that in case we are able to develop tourism across the country, then village tourism is also important. But given that India is very lucky to have exotic spots spread across the country, maybe to that extent, the approach from the village to the tourist spot is better rather than setting up urban areas. So it's like a Kerala model. You don't need to develop Hyderabad and Chennai, but the whole landscape is well developed because people are able to commute or conduct their business anywhere that they are. To my mind, that's also important because Dhanuraj, you mentioned it, and I think that's quite important that the tribals and the emphasis given by this government on the tribals, and tribals are generally in quote unquote rural areas. The emphasis on tribals can help develop the tribal areas, and therefore the spread of rural or qualities of a rural or qualities of a smart city can happen. Thinking in terms of the mall, which is the Unity Mall, where people can bring in their things and local artisans can bring in their things, the value to the local artisan is being given. And therefore, to my mind, if local artisan is doing a good work, and that reminds me of the village and Khadi projects and the Gandhi's dream, where village is empowered, that will also reduce the thrust on urbanization. So in this budget, what I thought that there is a very balanced budget. While they want to develop the urban areas, and they have these tourist spots, they have the artisans, they have the tribals in mind. They are also thinking in terms of modernizing agriculture, bringing in millets in a big way. So the development is going to be widespread, geographically very spatial. And if it is true that the government is thinking that we are here for 10 years, I don't see a massive exodus, or I don't see any acceleration in the trend of urbanization.
Thank you for the comment, sir. So coming to the next area of discussion, we have the primary sector, that the agriculture sector, that still has a major population employed. So it also got a flip in the budget announcement with the Agriculture Accelerator Fund to encourage the agri startups by young entrepreneurs. There was a 20 lakh crore agriculture credit targeted at animal husbandry, dairy, and fisheries, and also a new sub scheme is coming under PM Sampada Yojana. So the complete allotment has gone up by 4.6% to the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare. Also, the economic survey had recommended that government to take priority to crop diversification, like towards oil seeds, pulses, and horticulture, by addressing the core issues of irrigation, investment, and credit. So since you were part of NABARD for quite some time, so do you think farmers, you have an experience in this area of agriculture, so do you think farmers' expectations were met in the budget of 2023?
Is that a question for me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I was in the RBI for a long time,
Okay.
and not NABARD, but I happened to be on the board of NABARD
Yes.
Financial Services, right? And
Yes.
that is 4 years. That still doesn't make me an expert on agriculture.
Yeah.
But let me attempt to answer this question, because
Sure.
it's very interesting. So let me give you an example of Punjab. I come from Delhi, but I was in Punjab in 1971 to 74. Green Revolution had yet not started. And what I found that Punjab has so many crops, about 24 of them. And each was so rich and so tasty and so fresh. Then happened the Green Revolution. Under the Green Revolution, rice and wheat were the two cash crops, and they were actually the crowning glory, because the government provided minimum support price and assured market for them. So what happened? Intensive farming happened. Lots of chemical fertilizers were used. High yield variety seeds were used, and multiple cropping that was there earlier stopped. And all farmers of Punjab, Haryana started focusing only on rice and wheat. So much so that today the soil of Punjab is totally desertified. The life under the soil, which is a very crucial thing, is not there at all. Because it's desertified, the fear is that water from the ocean from Rajasthan, saline water, will enter Punjab and Punjab will become a desert forever. The negative implications of intensive use of fertilizers, especially chemicals, resulted in Punjab becoming the cancer capital of the country and numerous cases of kidney failure. This budget, by the way, has encouraged natural fertilizers. And the cow dung and all that is being utilized under the Govardhan, under that series. The government has also started thinking in terms of natural fertilizers, and that I think is very, very good. Now, going back to Punjab, Punjab was not suited for paddy at all. The water table in Punjab started depleting by a meter every year, and some places by 2 to 3 meters a year. The irrigation canals were not sufficient because at the sowing stage, you need to have water standing there. There are estimates that show for 1 kg of basmati, 3,000 liters of water is used to produce 1 kg of basmati. And if you export 1 kg of basmati, imagine 3,000 liters of water is going with it. And if you are exporting 1 ton of basmati, how much of water is going out of the country because of it? And that is why the water table started depleting. Now, when the government starts thinking in terms of, and of course, Punjab is not suited for paddy, and after the crop is harvested, then it is burned, and then again it pollutes the air badly. So the government has been talking, even in Punjab, of multiple cropping patterns. If you can go back and incentivize Punjab to go back to the crops that they were growing earlier. Now the problem is because the soil has been totally desertified, because of intensive use of chemicals, the life under the soil is totally dead. Can the farmer go back to the old cropping pattern and still get some yield, some commercial yield to survive? It's a difficult challenge. In the right earnest, before things like this happen, the government is directly saying that we need to encourage multiple cropping and multiple crops across the country. And because it's a large country, different geographical terrain, different climatic zones, the dependence on oil seeds that became so apparent under the Russia-Ukraine war showed that while we are self-dependent on rice and wheat and basic food, we are not in terms of other agriculture products. While we have been able to have food security, we still do not have nutrition security. So the nutrition is the next stage that we are looking for. So that is why the agriculture accelerator, that is why the clean plant program, and that is why the emphasis on millets, all this is being given. That is my understanding, and I think it's a very good strategy that the government is adopting. While we have seen that the ill effects of MSP is that the farmers become too dependent and later on are not willing to change. It is better that there's a multi-cropping pattern in the country, which gives us far more independence and far more security, and also which will give us high value of nutrition. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So I just have a supplementary question to this. Do you think we are in a position for that easy transition to this balanced use of fertilizers? Since the government has brought out this PM Prana, where they're looking for this balanced use of fertilizers. because I think most of the farmers are using chemical fertilizers for quite a long time. So is that graduation, I mean, the change or the shift is possible in a quicker way?
My own reading is that the world is beginning to realize that chemical fertilizers are not a very healthy, option. I do not know if you're aware that in many countries, the Punjab wheat was refused because they found that in the grain there are chemicals in it. While Punjab turned into the kidney failure center and the cancer capital of the country, the exports of such grain were also rejected by other countries. So once that level of understanding is there, that the world is shifting to organic farming, and these chemical fertilizers neither are good for your health nor for your produce, the change and acceptance towards natural fertilizers is obviously going to take place. So I would think there might have been some resistance, but with this understanding now reaching everywhere, there is going to be more acceptance.
Thank you, sir. So to Dhanu, sir. So since we are living in the coastal state of Kerala, the blue economy in the recent years have become a pertinent point of discussion. So, however, I'm yet to see a focused approach by the government towards this blue economy. So, what is your take on this? Has the budget accounted for blue economy?
Government of India, I don't think, to my understanding, we had the first minister for fisheries, a state minister, but it is part of agriculture ministry. That was in 2000. If I'm not wrong, it was in 2011-12. So that shows that how much importance that we had given to the fisheries sector at the national level, even though there are many state governments have fisheries ministries and fisheries department and all, and there are so many central institutions which are catering to the various requirements and demands, including the research and development. So now, right now, we have a minister. We have a minister and we have a separate department for the first time. And my understanding about this blue economy allocation is probably they are trying to realize the potential of the blue economy, not confined to the fishery and fisheries resources, but it's also about the minerals, metals, seabed, explorations. And there's a policy, there's a draft policy and a policy announcement by the government recent times. And I think it's very important, given the fact that we have got more than 7,000 kilometers of coastal line. And I always wonder why. And we have more than around 20 million people working in the fisheries in the country. And there are more than 7-8 states which has got a very significant population which are into fisheries directly or indirectly. And to an extent, some politics is also revolving around fisheries sector in the country. But my concern is, again, we have money now. Now, as a policy person, I started wondering, how are we going to do it? We give an example. I give an example. See, like what we discussed about urban infrastructure, whether we want metro or not, who is going to decide that? So it should not be something that is imposed from the capital, I mean, from Delhi, right? Giving an example, I don't know how many, let's say, fish landing centers we need. I'm just giving a very, very basic example. So if money is there, probably we end up building so many fish landing centers, but those many fish landing centers are not going to help the fisheries or fishing community at that. We need to strategize it, and I'm so happy that the government is trying to bring the involvement of technology to, and not only in fisheries sector, in agriculture. They're encouraging startups to use technology to improve the practices. So I think we need to have a scientific approach also. It's not only about building infrastructure. I think the blue economy requires more scientific approach than anything, because it's not about infrastructure. I think we have the Sagarmala project going on. So necessary infrastructure is going to be built at various places. This particular amount of money, I think, I hope they will spend for research and development and keeping the future in sight, how this is going to shape up the global economy in the future and how blue economy is going to play a very important role in that.
Thank you, sir. So as we are nearing the end of the post-budget discussions, I request all the listeners to put in your questions and comments in the chat box of the social media platforms that you have logged in. So we'll be collating all the questions and we'll be answering them as the time permits. So coming to the next important focus of the budget, this year's budget actually focused on green growth. The finance minister actually used the word green more than 20 times during her speech. So the budget for the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy has also increased this year by more than 3,000 crores. Also, there is a national green hydrogen mission, which was recently brought out, which is supposed to be a game changer. So also to steer the economy on the sustainable development path, VGF, Viability Gap Funding, has also been initiated for battery energy storage systems. So Dr. Charan Singh, how do you suggest the government focus more towards building capacity and technology for energy transitions, or just fund allocations as a support system is enough?
You see, this is something very important. India has the presidency of G20 now. And this is the best time to showcase to the world what India does and what India's policies have been in terms of carbon footprint. I think India has been the most responsible in the world when you look at the carbon footprint. So my own thought is that while not today, why not just this budget? If you remember, last 6-7 years, the emphasis on solar energy has been very high. There have been experiments which have been done which show that on the river, you have used the canals and rivers for the solar panels. Similarly, the photovoltaic cells have been subsidized and encouraged. In many parts, in many educational campuses, in many RWAs, the residential welfare associations have been encouraged to shift to solar for some purpose or the other, at least street lighting. The emphasis that the government has been making on green, on renewable sources of energy has been a continuity. Wind has also been explored in our country. Hydro, of course, is there, but then they can lead to seismic challenges, and therefore one has to be careful in how many villages get drowned, and so that's not something very encouraging. Coal, the side effects of coal are so visible and so dangerous that Germany, which is in dire need of energy, is thinking of doing away and phasing out. The fossil fuels, on one extent, could be polluting, but the amount of politicking that takes place behind fossil fuels is also not very good. So in the renewable sources of energy, I think India has been making a great effort. Even in the banking sector, the green credit, though it has been now recorded in the budget, but the government for the last few years has been talking about, and the Reserve Bank has been discussing and talking about, can we consider while giving credit to those sectors, encouraging those sectors which are taking care of the climate. Herein, I also want to bring in one story. The non-performing assets that can happen because of the climate or ignoring the climate can be very detrimental to the financial sector. You mentioned in the beginning, I chair a public sector bank. And I can tell you that loans given to farmers who grow apples, the feedback is that in Jammu and Kashmir, if earlier at this height, the apple got the juice and nectar and the color, it has stopped happening now. Now that happens at that height. But you have given loan to this farmer, crop loan or whatever, thinking that he'll be able to sell his crop at X amount. But because the crop is not ripening to the extent it was earlier, he is only able to fetch X minus something. You have given him loan, keeping in mind the X sale price commercially, but he is only able to sell it at X minus something. Who's going to suffer? So the point I'm making is that in the budget, the finance minister started thinking in terms of documenting and saying that we are thinking in terms of green credit. I think that's a great initiative. Also, it's meaningful because under this presidency of G20, we'll be able to talk about these issues. The other thing is that when we are thinking in terms of digital things, and I generally think in terms of lower brick and mortar branches, banking digitally, electronically, UPI, maybe shifting to tele-education, which means no commuting, and which may mean no more brick mortar schools and colleges, no more means lesser. And we could shift to telemedicine. That itself, and working from home, of course, has made an impact. These itself can impact in a big way the climate and global warming. And these need to be encouraged. My own idea that I floated a couple of years ago, where I said if we could provide the city an umbrella of internet, so people need not go to library or need not go to office to deliver work. If all they need to do is work on their laptop, they can pretty well do so at home rather than commute and pollute the environment from moving from home to office and then back. If the same laptop is going to be used in office or at home, why not sit at home and deliver? And that's very helpful as far as climate is concerned. So my own feeling is the emphasis that the government is giving on digital and of course on green funds and green fund banking is going to go a long way in ensuring that India in a way becomes a lighthouse for the rest of the world. Last point I want to make here is I have a feeling like we leapfrogged the industrialization stage. Normally, growth path from agriculture to industry to services. But we did not do the industry because China became the industry of the world. I have a feeling that in case we are on the path of glory, growing from number 10 position of GDP to number 5, if we are able to exploit the digital world properly, our race to the top will become far more accelerated. And we need not then follow the same trajectory which other countries have followed, but because we have used digital in such a significant way, much better than the rest of the world. And this is not boasting. This is not talking in thin air. The banking technology in our country is on the cutting edge, better than the rest of the world. The OTP that you and me get, the UPI transactions that we do, these are far better than anywhere in the world. So therefore, we have the capability, and if we are able to do commerce, enhancement of commerce on digital platforms, while our income levels will go up, our pollution levels will not be that high. That is the promise that I see in the green world in years ahead.
So just to get a clarity on this, so we have a positive, favorable demographic dividend as of now, but most of the reports say that the employability of the youth is very less, and most of them work in the informal sector. So in this context, I agree with your vision that we should be more into the digital and the service sector, but that is a highly skilled sector, right? So how can we meet these ends without a manufacturing sector, robust manufacturing sector?
Yeah, you're very right. I like that question. But I 10 years back could never imagine that on the roadside I can buy a sandwich under a Paytm. Today also, when I carry my cell phone and I go to a shop, even today, downstairs in Greater Noida. I bought some vegetables from a cart, local cart, the guy who wanders with the cart street to street. And do you know he had a Paytm card and I used my cell phone to pay him? Within 6, 7 years, if this is what can happen, and you can go to the cobbler and pay through this. So my mind says, where you have the youth ready to adapt, born in a culture where digital is the buzzword, graduating to the digital world is not going to be a challenge at all. It's going to happen far more rapid. Financial literacy is necessary, but because of the jam trinity, the mobile phone brings in so much of knowledge and standard working experience of digital world. I think the transition is going to become far more faster. I also feel this will open up a new value which the young demographic will be able to explore and exploit. To give you an illustration, in my generation, I wanted a black and white or something on the paper if you wanted to attract my attention. If I go to the road, I would need a physical placard for advertising. But with the young world, which is glued to their cell phones, you could have advertisements on the cell phone. And therefore, the young minds who are attuned to digitally working there could be a new startups which only cater to the youth through the applications on the cell phone. So to me, it opens up a new avenue, a new universe of activities. And therefore, the young demographic country that we are, instead of depending on printed audio material, they could have the same audio video material on the cell phone. So I think it's easy and it can be done, it can be adapted. The last point I want to make in this context is I did a survey at IIM Bangalore. We were looking at financial inclusion. And you'll be surprised. I always thought I am above 60 and always thought people above 55 are then less responsive to adapting to technology. Their fears of losing money, not feeling comfortable by punching buttons, all that I thought was happening. But when we did a survey in Tumkur area, we were surprised. Elderly men and women were as enthusiastic as anyone else to learn how to do digital banking or e-banking. So therefore, that urge, apart from convenience, the urge of a novelty or something new is always there. So adaptability for the youth is going to be far better, faster, and swifter than senior citizens. But even senior citizens have that urge, and that's possible. That's why I say it's possible.
Sure, sir. Dhanu sir, I would like to know your comments on this area, like whether we should follow the traditional path from agriculture to manufacturing and then the service sector, or should we focus more on the service sector?
I think, that old school is, for me, it's a little outdated in the global context we are living in now, today. When the old schools were built, theorized decades back, I think there was no concept of globe as a village, except for the expeditions that many of these navigators made during those times. Today, I can call anyone anywhere in the world sitting here, right? So that, like what Dr. Charan Singh mentioned, we are living in a completely different world, different era. And you mentioned about the demographic dividend. We have more than 50% of our population. They're in the age bracket up to 45, right? So they are quite adaptable, or they are ready to accept. They are also very aspiring. So UPI model is a great model. It actually showed that we could do it. So I actually wonder the other day when Election Commission talks about remote, what you call the remote ballot boxes, meaning the machines. I was actually wondering, why are they discussing it? Why don't we have cell phone access? You can vote using online, platforms. This is possible because billions of transactions are happening in this country, and if you can transfer your money with in a secured mode, I think vote could also be a very secured one, right? So I believe service sector and the related industries are going to grow. But given the population that we have, I think the manufacturing sector is also very important because India being one of the, I think we are going to be the most populous country in the world. So cater to the requirements with respect to the employment generation. I don't think service sector alone would be able to do that. Like what we discussed about urban, I believe there could be a mix of manufacturing and a service sector emerging. Some of the positive offshoots of service sector will go back to manufacturing sector, right? And that will be the nature, that will be the way the economy will grow from now on.
So I think we can take some questions from the audience now. There are quite a number of questions from the audience. So this is a question from Anu Anna. So while healthcare spending occupied about 2.2% of the budget last year, it reduced to 1.97% this year. R&D got some attention this year. The expectation was for the budget to increase health expenditure to at least 2 to 2.5% with a dedicated focus towards primary and secondary healthcare. Don't you think that the health sector needs special focus to address the ever-rising disease burden, make treatments and therapies cost-effective? So I think either of you can answer the question. Dr. Charan Singh.
I think differently about health. Firstly, there's a center and state, both participate in health, and only looking at center will give you only a partial picture. But after the Ayush ministry, I always think that we in India are so much, unfortunately, addicted by the modern allopathic system. I don't say it doesn't have merits. We all know it has merits. But all I say is, why were the Indian, Unani, Ayurvedic, homeopathy systems neglected? And if you look at the yogic exercises, which basically work on your breath, they are no cost. So to my mind, the emphasis now should shift to wellness rather than sickness. And I have been always telling the insurance industry, why don't you call yourself a wellness industry? If I fall sick, you pay me when I'm in the hospital for my treatment. But when I'm not sick, why can't you? I've paid you a premium. Why don't you give me vouchers for wellness centers and these places where I can go and do either exercises or do anything? So I am encouraged to stay healthy. Why do you encourage me to stay sick? Because if I'm sick, I work 24 hours and then I fall sick. I know my employer says, you are covered under health insurance. But why don't you cover me under wellness insurance? So that I can go and every day either spend an hour in a yogic center or in a place where I can do exercises in open air or closed air, whatever. So my feeling is, under such a rich medical system that we have, Ayurveda, where each plant, each leaf, each seed has remedial or health implications. In your own house, which Indian house doesn't have haldi or onions? And these are all health potents in health medicines. So therefore, instead of looking at the way the Western world criticizes us, that your health budget is so weak, what are you doing with your people? I always tell them, that our health budget is not weak, our parameters is wrong. We need to emphasize more on this. Similarly, I generally argue with people that you want to buy Colgate toothpaste. Good, go ahead, you can afford it, fine. But what is wrong with the Neem Datan? I can use that. And now if I compare the cost of Colgate and the Neem Datan, it is zero versus some X amount. So therefore, I'm sorry, it looks very non-traditional. I've been educated in the best parts of the world, in the best schools of economics. But I've reached a conclusion that these parameters, these have been thrust on us by the Westerners. So I would like a wellness insurance, which will encourage me every day, give me coupons. Instead of taking care of me when I'm sick, they should also encourage me to stay healthy. And therefore, I can go into athletic centers, sports centers. Now, you and me, please remember, go to the villages and see how they do wrestling in the open. And I don't know why, when I moved into urban area, I'm so shy of wrestling or doing sports which are no cost like Kho. So many times, and I've written a paper for the sports ministry saying, can you please encourage Indian sports, so which are low cost but very healthy, and then ensure there's wellness. So I look at the health budget from a very different angle, and I want the local medicines and local sports to be encouraged in a bigger way.
I agree with you, sir. Prevention is always better than cure. So this is another question from Paul to Professor Charan Singh. What are your views on Finance Minister's budget announcements on financial sector, like a credit scheme for the MSMEs, the KYC process, support for the digital public infrastructure, etc.?
Absolutely, that's what we need. We need to modernize. Means this government came out with a scheme saying that you need not even look in the face of the guy who's assessing your income tax. So faceless settlement of accounts, right? Similarly, I feel if my credit history is good, my track record is good, why should I be sitting across the desk of a banker and seeking and begging for loan? I should just put in an application and it should be faceless. And on the basis of all the information that you have about me, and that should be secret from my neighbors and my friends and my family, that is okay. But the National Information Services, like Sybil, can be sitting somewhere with a track record of my commercial activities or my economic activities or financial activities, and loan applications are processed on the merit rather than on the way I look. So, to me, the government has moved in that direction by ensuring that databases are collected and databases are maintained. For the senior citizens, now that I'm a senior citizen, I'm so happy to see that we are not forgotten. And there are schemes which have been announced for us, even for women who are generally, because I have kept saying right from beginning that female labor force participation is very low in the country. And once the labor force participation is low, empowerment is lower, unfortunately. But the government has come out with a scheme where women have special investment instrument now. And I think that's very encouraging. As far as insurance is concerned, I think that insurance penetration is lagging behind the banking penetration. Whereas insurance again gives you lots of security, and that penetration has to increase. So I think under the various schemes that the government announced in the financial sector, while banking will be encouraged, insurance will be encouraged, and I'm looking forward to a day when loans will be processed and granted in a faceless manner. And that's in that direction.
That's a good thought, sir. So and the next question is to Dr. Dhanuraj. has the relevance of production-linked incentive declined because there were no open announcements regarding allocation for the scheme in the budget?
No, I'm not a big supporter of PMLI for the since government started these initiatives. Performance-linked initiatives. For me, my basic fundamental issue with that concept is, how do you decide those sectors? You have a bunch of sectors. You can think about 100 sectors, you can think about 10 sectors, you can think about one sector. But how do you decide that? For me, it's a market activity. The reason why we are not able to see, for example, Prime Minister is talking about Atmanirbhar Bharat, right? So I said this was the argument 2 decades back, 3 decades back, of made in India or make in India. Make in India is Prime Minister argument. Made in India argument was there earlier also. So I always believe that this is the old wine in the new bottle with a different flavor. And now, if you look at some of the numbers, for example, one of the sectors they discussing is mobile sector, mobile phone manufacturing. And whenever I looked at those numbers, it doesn't give me that much of confidence in terms of how many mobile phones we could export and how many mobile phones we manufacture and use in the domestic market, right? And mobile story is always a different story for various other reasons also. If that is the case with the mobile sector, then I'm wondering what is happening with other sectors. Now we talk a lot about Apple coming, and Commerce Minister the other day was claiming that 25% of the manufacturing is going to be shifted to India, right? But mobile story, even then, is it because of performance-linked PLI scheme or not is a question. That is one. So this time government has not discussed it in detail, like what we thought about. There will be a discussion about taxation on cryptocurrency. That was not discussed, interestingly, but they discussed about the gaming industry. That again, I have some serious reservations about the way that taxation has come into now, 30% flat structure. So going back to the PLI structure, I believe it should be left to the market instead of market-linked performance. I believe easiness of doing business is something that we need to do, like what Dr. Charan Singh mentioned. Somebody looking for a credit, somebody looking for labor, somebody looking for skilled labor. They should have those ecosystem that is conducive enough for them to operate in India, more than any incentive scheme. If you go to see, these are all incentives, exemptions that we have been giving for many decades. And one fails, another comes. So I do believe that PLI scheme success can be evaluated only after 10 years. And I worry that somebody that time would do a study and say that PLI scheme was also a failure.
Okay, so Dr. Charan Singh, do you have any comments on this regarding the production-linked incentives?
Yeah, I think there have been lacunas there and much has been discussed about it. But in the budget, they have made huge provision for PLI scheme, by the way, and substantial. Well, there is a viewpoint that PLI has been contributing significantly to larger exports because, in a way, it links up and then you become more competitive because of the incentives that you get. Please remember, China subsidizes its exports to 170%. I'm sure as a student, you do not know what 170% means. I can understand 70%, 170%. And I was stunned when I was told in the first time I was abroad. It means if producing a product cost me 100 rupees, China gives me back 170 rupees. 70 rupees for telling me, go ahead, do it next time, here is your reward. So the point I'm making is that if you are competing with unethical, quote unquote, you can call it as a promotion scheme. You can call it the cigarette industry did exactly that, addicting people to smoke. And that time they would not only give you, they will not charge you for a cigarette, but along with the cigarette, they'll give you some free can of Coke and say, please smoke a cigarette. And from our side, you have a free can of Coke. And that's how you incentivize and educe people. And once you have addicted them, then you charge them as they start earning, or whatever said and done. In such a circumstance, if you can incentivize, and fortunately, unfortunately, again, against all the odds, the export growth was the highest in the last year. And partially the credit is ascribed to PLI scheme. I'm sure it can be fine-tuned. Sitting in Delhi, people are telling, why don't you extend the PLI scheme to all commodities, even shipping industry? I said, okay, that's interesting. So that issue is there. But there's a beautiful question that I see, which is directed to me, and I do not know what it is the intent. And that is that, being an army man yourself, what does the rupees 5.9 lakh crore defense budget tell you? It tells me very interesting things. It tells me if I have to import F-16, it's going to cost me 100x. And if I manufacture the same F-16 under some name, say Tejas, it's going to cost me 1x. So, which good country in the world under the computerized regime import equipment? Means if I import a high-tech fighter plane from a country and later on they decide to put in a spec and update its software and hardware by when I'm in the middle of the flight, and instead of me going that side of the border, it takes me on the other side of the border by playing with my equipment, what good is it for me? Similarly, my guns, my helicopters, my radar system. Rather, if I indigenously produce these things, it's going to cost me much less. So the point I'm making is, behind this 5.9 lakh crore defense budget, which will not show you a substantial increase from the previous year, something more has to be seen in this. What is the indigenous component of defense equipment, which is now being sourced from places like within India, under the defense companies we have, or things that are being produced by DRDO? That has to be understood. My understanding is the import content of defense equipment is coming down, and that is being replaced by equipment that is being produced within the country. And I think that's a very positive thing. And that is how it should be. I don't think America imports any fighter planes from France. I think India needs to build its capabilities of tanks, fighter planes, helicopters, ships, defense ships, all built within our country, submarines to be built within our country. And that's why when the cost factor is very less when produced within the country, obviously it may not reflect in the annual incremental change in defense budget.
Thank you, sir, for that observation. So there's one last question to you. This is from Nitin Kamath. Creating infrastructure like cold chain in rural areas would have helped the agriculture sector and rural economy. So what is your opinion on this in the backdrop of the budget 2023?
Is that question to me?
Yes, sir.
I'm thrilled. It creates employment in the rural areas and it enhances the life of the product. So there'll be no distress sale. That enhances the income of the rural folks. And while you are constructing the cold storage, there's employment. While you are preserving things in your cold storage, it's going to give you again employment and good revenue and higher income. That's why I say, as we grow further, instead of saying that every Indian should carry a spade on the shoulder in the morning and seen walking into the field and coming back in the evening, until the budget creates those sort of things, I don't think it's employment oriented. I think that orientation has to change. The skill levels have to increase. And under the high skill levels, I'm not looking for every morning people with a spade on the shoulder walking in and walking out. I'm looking for such ideas which give you better income, better value chain, and also need skills. And that can position you globally also better. If I have good quality cold storages across the villages, not only my food grains, I'll be able to take care of my flowers, which is a craze in the world, and food items and fruit items, which I can then export. So many people in our country, especially in Himachal and some parts of Punjab, are shifting to floriculture. And that is because they're able to store their flowers are very sensitive. They're able to store their produce and then export it. Also, if you have cold storages, you will not be at the mercy of the traders who can use your desperation to push out the prices or hurt you. It gives you time, at least till the market stabilizes, to sell your product. So I'm very happy in case that happens and needs to happen.
Thank you, sir. Since it's almost 6 o'clock and I know I have to complete the webinar on time since you have another engagement. So I think we'll wind up the session. There are a few more questions. If Dhanu sir can stay back for a little while, maybe I can put forward that questions to you. So, just to conclude the session, like the major key takeaways from the discussion that we had, the government's path to fiscal consolidation is actually continuing unabated. That was the first observation that we made. The government is thinking of futuristic approach while providing continuity of the past in this budget to strengthening sectors, which will provide a multi-generational effect. That was the first key takeaway. Second, Professor Charan Singh talked about the urban model. Countries can only be clean and smart when people decide to become clean and smart. Hence, strengthening the local bodies can be a great decision. But we should start experimenting with the urban model fully in order to strengthen the urban local bodies. The third major observation was the government has been quite clear with its intention to promote and boost a multi-cropping system in our agriculture sector with nutrition, food security, and farmers' interdependence. India had paid emphasis to renewable energy over 7 to 8 years, and the country is now leading in its carbon footprint. With a reduced carbon footprint, India's digital growth and digital mission will further positive move towards climate change. And to conclude, I think we are on the same pace that the skills have to be improved. The favorable demographic dividend to be fully used, we have to improve the skills so that more employment that is being created out of the infrastructural spending can be better utilized. So thank you, Dr. Charan Singh, for spending your time with us, for your valuable contributions, insightful comments on different sectors of the budget. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Dhanuraj, for the engaging discussion. Thank you for the participants for logging in and listening to us intently and for all your questions. And I would also like to thank our organizing team at CPPR, especially the communication team. And with this, I would like to formally close today's proceedings. Thank you.